Today's last speaker is Professor Ranjit Makeshwar. He's Associate Professor of Preventive and Social Medicine at Grant Medical College, and he involved in clinical research in J.J. Hospital. He has publications in international and national journals, and he specialized in epidemiology and
bad handwriting, clinical biostatistics.
Okay.
I've been associated with Dr. Nayak before, so we've worked together. Well, I'm a very passionate proponent of the case control research method, and I'll say why you should all do it. 15 minutes is a bit too brief to do it, but let me try to do it anyway. This is a nice graph of the different research methods that are available to all of us. And basically, there are just two types of research methods. One is in which there is no intervention by anybody, and the other is there is intervention by the investigator. And as we move along the typology of this, you will see that one part of observational research generates hypothesis and the other tests it. This is all generally, and there are several variants of each method, but a case control study goes backward in time and a cohort study goes forward in time. And so you may say that, well, then why don't we all do only cohort studies in the future? Well, suppose you know that a hazard, that a risk factor is hazardous, or you know that smoking causes or may cause some type of cancer. As much as you would like to be mean to the general population, you just cannot get 100 people and give them a packet of cigarettes every day and say, oh, smoke away and in 20 years I'll see you in my hospital. It's not ethical and it's not a good way of doing research. So for rare causes, for putative hazards, it's a really good study. There are several of these studies which have been done in the past, and it has a very hoary history. But the one study that I'd like you to see in all this is the British doctor study done by Hill. And it was a study done on British doctors which led to the first really excellent paper on smoking and carcinoma of the lung. Case control study polarizes people like no other study. So there are people who say that, oh, case control study is really amazing. And there are some people who say that, oh, case control study has so many problems with it. In the modern day, there are several things that have happened, that have strengthened the case control study quite a lot. But remember, if you want to do a drug trial or something, the randomized control trial remains the gold standard method. So what do we do with the case control study? And the primary use of a case control study is just to assess risk and to study causes. So you study, or you study one type of a chronic disease or a rare disease, and you want to assess which are the risk factors which are significant. These are the several names that have been called to a case control study, but we use case control. Now, control has been typically used in the randomized control trial. Here it's really a comparison group, but we historically use the term control. The first thing to remember that a case control study is observational in nature. So you don't do anything, you merely record observations. Occasionally it can be exploratory, but that's only in ambidextrous case control studies and in some other ways. It is explanatory, it is used very commonly to test hypothesis, and it is retrospective. So in essence, we go from effect to cause. And when we go in a backward kind of direction, there are several biases which can creep in the study. And we'll see how we can take care or try to minimize these biases. When you do a case control study, and this is a common graph, but I just needed to show it anyway. This is how you table your findings. Any particular risk factor that you take, whether cases are people with disease, controls are people who don't have disease, and whether the risk factor is present or absent. This is a classic, what is called as a 2x2 table of case control research. But let me give you a good example of how research actually progresses. Let's take ophthalmology example. the role of oxygen in retrorental fibroplasia among premature infants. So these are the type of research studies, and we just saw case reports. And I'll again illustrate how case reports are important in research. The first case was published as back in 1941 by Dr. Clifford from Boston. Then Silverman accumulated a case series. This is published by Silverman, but a case series was accumulated. Following a case series of infants with retrorental fibroplasia, there was a case control study carried out. Now it had 53 cases and about 300 controls. There was association seen with oxygen. However, people who looked at the study findings thought that oxygen was not the cause, but that poor health of the infants necessitated them to get more oxygen. In fact, cohort studies were carried out, and the results were mixed. Some cohort studies were implicated oxygen, the others didn't. There were 2 randomized control trials carried on, and the second collaborative multicentral trial confirmed the role of oxygen, thereby proving that the case control study which was initially done was indeed robust and the findings were applicable. This is an example of community research. The death rates from coronary artery disease were analyzed from 20 countries and led to the hypothesis of the LA association. LA means nothing but lipids and atherogenosis. These are the several studies, and there was a famous Framingham study, there was case control studies, and there were cohort studies. And this proved subsequently and led to numerous preventive programs which proved that lowering cholesterol levels indeed reduced death rates. Where do you get your cases from? And you all work in hospitals. So the first spot for getting cases is hospitals. There are some case control studies where you go to the community to get cases, and industrial research or industrial health you get cases from the industrial population, but mostly hospitals form a source because cases that are done in case control studies are typically done when the disease is rare. So hospitals is where they aggregate. Controls are people who don't have disease, and you need to be very specific about who is the control. Now, where do we get controls from? We also get controls from hospitals. We can get relatives, we can use neighborhood controls. See, remember, neighborhood controls and community controls are a little harder to get, because if you go around asking people and say that, oh, I'm going to just do 20 blood tests on you and subject you to 1 MRI, 2 X-rays, will you participate in my study anyway? So that's a little difficult. But remember, when you take hospital controls, you are also have to be very careful because it opens up specially 2 biases. One bias is called a Bergson's bias or a Bergson's paradox, if you want to be statistically really perfect, which means that cases get admitted to the hospital because of the exposure, and controls getting admitted to the same hospital because of some other exposure. There is a bias in hospitalization rates. That is a selection bias. There is another bias which is because of, suppose, let's take an example. Suppose you take cancer of the pancreas and you have patients who have been suffering with cancer of the pancreas for 4 years, and you ask them history of coffee drinking. And they say, yes, we drink a lot of coffee. But suppose these patients had queasy sensation in their stomach, and to quell this queasy sensation, they were drinking coffee. There is a change in the typology. So that is another bias that can creep up in this study. Why do we take hospital controls? And every year I get at least 4 or 5 people coming from our hospital saying that we've done a case control study, and they take hospital controls. Why? Because these are accessible. So what typically people do in a hospital, take cases, a medicine person will take cases from the medicine ward and then just simply go to the surgical ward and take another case. How good is this approach? Well, it is good, but you have to keep in mind that you have to do some sort of matching of cases and controls. And I'll come to matching later. Second thing is, how large a sample do I need? And we just saw a very good lecture on sample size. But for a case control study, there are certain methodological limitations on how you can calculate a sample size. How many cases and controls should be included in the study? Remember, you can use more controls to a case, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, and sometimes 4, but typically more than 4 controls per case is not really beneficial to the study. But this is the formula for the sample size. And it's a little complicated formula, but I'll explain it to you. Sir has already explained Z alpha and Z beta to you. Only thing you have to remember is this. This is the proportion of the exposure under question in the control population. And you calculate this, and odds ratios are the odds ratios that are already published in published literature. We use RR, but really we use odds ratios in case control studies. To reduce these biases, we actually do something called matching. And when we say matching, is that we try to make the cases and controls comparable, like apple-apple comparison. Remember, there is a big tendency to overmatch, like make them similar in all respects. And what will happen if you do that? If you make them similar in all aspects, what will happen? Anybody? Well, if they are similar in exposure also, you are not going to get any results. So, typically what is done nowadays is that you do age and what is called as frequency matching, and you do gender matching. These are the known confounders. You can mathematically model the data afterwards. Overzealous matching is sometimes problematic, and this can also lead to your odds ratios being weird. How do you assess exposure? Exposure is assessed by several methods, and depending on what your exposure under question is. Suppose you say that serum creatinine is a risk factor, elevated serum creatinine is a risk factor implicated in coronary artery disease or in acute myocardial infarction in those who are under 45 years of age. Suppose this is your hypothesis, then you would have to do serum creatinine. So there you can have a biological marker. You can also collect histories. Again, remember, histories are a little problematic because we are going back in time. Suppose you are asking a 50-year-old person his smoking history, and he's been smoking for the last 30 years. And I've seen several case control studies where people just started smoking for 30 years. But has he been smoking the same amount, the same brand? Is it possible that 30 years back he had the same amount of financial resources to buy Marlboro that he's smoking today? Or maybe he started with some other cigarette. Maybe then he was still living in his own home. He is smoking a little less on the sly. So you have to remember that exposures change over time and they have to be recorded. How would you deal with this? If you were to take a study and you ask smoking history of 30 years, then how would you deal with it? Sometimes it's very useful to have like a flip chart, You take a picture of several types of cigarette brands of whatever is being used and you show them. The same thing can be done for alcohol. And remember, alcohol is even more potent an exposure to calculate. Because alcohol, it's not one thing. Some people are drinking gin, some people are drinking whiskey, some people are drinking beer, some people are drinking rum, some people are drinking whatever they get. 5 types. Some people are drinking once a week, some people drink every day, some people drink more when there's a party. You have all kinds of exposure which you have to convert into 2 things. A dose of alcohol. That is one thing. About tobacco, it's another thing altogether. Tobacco is consumed in how many forms? I'll just finish quickly. Tobacco is consumed in how many forms? You smoke tobacco, you chew tobacco, you eat gutka. So that cumulative tobacco exposure needs to be taken. There is an unmatched case control design and a matched case control design. In a matched case control study, there is one control for each case. It's a pair. And this is how you design it. I'm afraid I don't have the time to explain a matched case control to you. It's a little specific design. But this is a typology or the way you show an unmatched case control study. What you generate out of a case control study is an odds ratio. And what do you mean by the term odds? Odds mean nothing but the probability. And like a lot of punters do cricket betting. So what are they betting on? They're betting on odds that will Pakistan win the third one-day international if they've already won the first two one-day internationals. This is nothing but a probability. If you take a classic 2x2 table that we showed, this gives you exposure of cases compared to all the cases and exposure in controls, all the controls. If you divide this, you get A into D by B into C, you get what is called as an odds ratio. An odds ratio is nothing but a comparison of odds in those who are exposed versus those who are unexposed. It is analogous or more or less analogous to relative risk. Can we do relative risk in a case control study? No, we can't, because we have not calculated incidences, have we? So we can't do, so we have to rely on odds ratio. Now remember, Cornfield has these assumptions on case control, on odds ratios. And one of this is the disease has to be rare. The cases have to be representative of those with the disease, and the controls have to be representative of those without the disease. This is how you interpret a odds ratio. And now you would be wondering, what is an odds ratio of 0.4? What does it all mean? It means it's a benefit. But suppose I were to give you an example. Suppose saying that eating 50 grams of cooked green leafy vegetables thrice a day for more than 20 years is a protective risk factor against stomach cancer. Suppose that is a hypothesis and you get an odds ratio of 4, it means that that is a moderate benefit. As you cross, odds ratio of 1 means that there is no association. As the odds increase, it means that the risk factor that you observed is a hazard. Let me give you this last example of prenatal irradiation and childhood leukemia. These are the cases on top, these are the controls, and that is the exposure. And the odds ratio works out to be 1.48. It's not a great association. But what it tells you is that children who have been irradiated in utero have almost a 50% excess risk of developing leukemia. If this becomes 2, how much will the in percentages be? Anybody? If the odds ratio is 2, how much will it be? You just saw this example. It will be double the risk, right? So that's how you calculate odds ratio. Now there are several biases in case control studies, and by good design and by good post hoc analysis or by good mathematical modeling you can minimize them. The 3 categories of biases are: one is a misclassification, a selection bias, where cases and controls are selected in an erroneous fashion. Second is a misclassification bias, where you misclassify exposure in cases and controls and also measure them incorrectly. And third is confounding. I just want to explain confounding in a minute for you. Let's take the example of alcohol and esophageal cancer, and suppose the confounder is smoking. So let's take the definition. Extraneous is a fancy epidemiological way of saying external. Exposure disease association is between alcohol is the exposure, disease is esophageal cancer. Smoker. Is a smoker external to this relationship? Is smoking external to this relationship? It's a separate risk factor, yes. Smoking is itself an independent risk factor for esophageal cancer. So it is predictive of the disease. And lastly, it is unequally distributed between the exposure groups. What does it mean by that? Generally, those who smoke also drink. And in those who drink, the percentage of people who smoke is much higher than in those who don't drink. This satisfies all the three conditions of a confounder, and you can control confounders by two ways. You can do stratification. But what happens, like Sir said, you are already running with a very, very tiny sample size, and then you stratify it into many cells, and Wolff's condition of homogeneity is completely lost. And because it's completely lost, you cannot rely on that. So what you do nowadays is that you mathematically model the data using some sort of logistic regression analysis. The advantages of the case control method are it's easy to carry out. These are the advantages. Disadvantages are that. However, remember that if you start with a well calculated sample size and you conduct your study well and have a rigorous mathematical analysis of the study, it's still an excellent study to carry out. Thank you. I'm sorry for taking too much time.
Thank you very much. I think we needed to do that, but we were delayed in the beginning, and I'm glad in spite of that we could cover what all we want to do. But any questions or comments by Dr. Nayak? Nitin? Anything from the postgraduates?
I've left them speechless or dumbfounded.
Alok will not be speechless. Alok will have some questions. Dr. Alok is joining our part of our, he's a veterinary surgeon, now joining us and IGOS. Alok, you can give some your comments or questions. Microphone.
Actually, we evaluate the risk factors for in case control studies. When we say the risk factor become a causative factor.
Well, you have to, there are so many slides which I've deleted. One of them is, there's a calculation of something called attributable risk proportion. Yeah. And then you say that how much of the disease is attributable to the risk factor. There's a very simple formula for that. There's a very simple formula which you extrapolate the ARP formula to what is called as a PARP, and you can actually P for population, and you can attribute, if you know how much is it in the population, you can actually say that in the population this is the risk of getting the disease with this risk factor.
One more thing, in case control study, we take the records, mainly what we do, we take the records. But many patients are seen by many different doctors, how do you measure the skill of those who are looking?
Well, it becomes easier if you're measuring something. So you typically think that your colleagues are as intelligent as you are and are recording data correctly. So if you're measuring something, if it is measurement data, you can be reasonably sure that the data entered is correct. But the problem is when you're measuring soft data and soft questions about habits, about income, and suppose somebody is really patient and you try to dig out information, you would get better quality information. And that is exactly why a record study is not a case control study. I mean, many people try to put it like that, but it's a little harder to do it that way. It's probably not a methodologically correct way to do it. Yeah, I showed that.
And your exclusion rate.
Absolutely.
That must be very clear.
Yeah, and B1, the most important thing is, the best thing you can do for your case control study is to get incident cases. Cases as early as they are diagnosed. To prevent recall bias and several other biases from creeping in. Suppose you are taking a cancer of the esophagus is your study. Then it is very well if you limit the diagnosis to the last 1 year and keep taking cases only diagnosed in the last 1 year, so that everything remains fresh, histories are fresh, exposure histories are fresh. So that's a good way of tackling it. The minute you start taking historical patients and historical data, there's no surety on what has been done.
Okay, and I request Dr. Radhika, our editorial coordinator, to give a memento and also a bouquet to Dr. Ranjit Makeshwar. And thank you very much for accepting to give a talk on the short notice.
No problem, sir. Thank you.